When someone gets trapped in a grain bin, the odds are already against them. Purdue University reports that more than half of the victims don't survive. Now in Southwest Missouri, one of the only departments with the right equipment to help is in Fairgrove. Now that's more than an hour away from Clever, Missouri, where a man got stuck in a grain bin and died. KY3's Cotter Trett talked with Fairgrove's fire chief about why that's the case and what may be done about it.
Currently, north of us, the department neighboring to the north of us does have this equipment, but in all the other directions, probably an hour in about every direction from Fairgrove besides north.
The Fairgrove Fire Department is one of a few stations in southwest Missouri with a cofferdam, a specialized piece of equipment made of large metal slats used for grain bin rescues.
It essentially forms a tube around the individual trapped in grain, and then we have an auger piece of equipment to remove that grain from around the victim to allow us to pull them out.
And this is what it looks like in action in a training demonstration from our sister station in Indiana.
Chief Hoskins says that equipment like this is relatively inexpensive, around $5,000. But grain bin rescue calls are so rare in the area that many departments weren't able to justify that cost. However, after the recent incident in Clever, Missouri, more departments are looking into buying one.
I've received numerous phone calls, emails from different surrounding agencies that are now interested in pursuing this piece of equipment because of the unfortunate incident that happened.
Although it seems simple in its design and in its execution, this piece of equipment is the best thing available when the situation calls for it.
When you have a piece of equipment that is designed to do a very specific task, the efficiency gained from having this piece of equipment is unmeasured compared to having to makeshift something similar.
Now, departments can buy these pieces of equipment outright or they can apply for grants. Nationwide Insurance has a grain bin safety awards program. They give departments across the nation the equipment and necessary training. And Nationwide tells us that one of the departments getting the equipment this year will be a department in Southwest Missouri.